What makes Barry Bluestone so bright for a Boyle CGA award is his powerful belief in bringing communities together to develop workable solutions. Since the early 1980s, Barry's strong and progressive voice has shone a bright light on the United States' ever-increasing economic disparity long before other economists even saw it coming. Barry is a professor of political economy, the founding director of the Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy, which they call a think and do tank. I love that. And the founding dean of the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs at Northeastern University. Barry is a practical public intellectual, explains Elaine Bernard, the Harvard Trade Union Program's director.
Just get closer, that's good.
Closer?
That's good.
Should I repeat it?
You're perfect.
Barry's a delightful guy who's a serious academic, a respected researcher doing inspired policy work on real-world problems. His father was the pioneering UAW Vice President Irving Bluestone, who Barry co-wrote a book with, a very terrific book. While a teenager in college in the 1960s, Barry was one of 10 founders of the University of Michigan Student Employees Union, and he paid his way through college as a member of UAW Local 898 at the local Ford plant. Later, as a professor at UMass Boston, he was an active member of the Mass Teachers Association. He developed the groundbreaking UAW-GM Paid Education Leave Training Program in the 1980s and has worked with the National Education Association. Barry spends considerable time consulting with trade unions, with industry groups, with various federal and state agencies. In 2011, he co-authored with the great Tom Kochen from MIT a Boston Foundation-sponsored white paper entitled Toward a New Grand Bargain, Collaborative Approaches to Labor Management Reform in Massachusetts. Barry is a principal player in a bold project that emerged from that white paper. The new Massachusetts Education Partnership was launched last month at UMass Boston, now headed by our past CGA winner, Nancy Peace. A prolific writer and thinker, Barry has been a guest on countless news and TV shows and radio. Barry is author of hundreds of articles and monographs, and even has a blog on Boston.com. And tonight's program lists a few of the 11 amazing books that he's co-authored. He lives with his wife Mary Ellen Colton in Cambridge, and their son Joshua attends Northwestern University. The 2012 Father Edward Boyle Award, and he read your books. I can remember him reading your book on deindustrialization and him waving it saying, "He nailed it, he nailed it." To Barry Bluestone, a great and necessary national voice.
Well, I'm the guy who's between you and dinner, so I'm going to keep it fairly short. But I do want to thank Bishop Dewar and my fellow wonderful awardees, John Duma, John Dunlop, Ken Grace. I have to tell you a story. I grew up not in this town. I grew up in the great city of Detroit, Michigan, as the son of a UAW international representative that you'll hear a little bit more about. And I went through a wonderful inner city high school, Mumford High School, made famous by Eddie Murphy in Beverly Hills Cop. Played pulling guard for, was a junior in the wonderful season in which we went 0-11. Went to the University of Michigan, paid my way through that school because I worked on an assembly line building carburetors into the first Ford Mustang. In fact, in those days, We were selling so many cars that I had to work on Sunday, July 4th, 10-hour shift. And I made enough money in a single day, in a single shift, to pay my entire tuition for the fall of that year. I have a son, Mary Ellen and I have a son who's at Northwestern University, didn't go to Michigan, couldn't get him to go to Northeastern. I'm paying a little bit more than back then. But I arrived here after getting my PhD at the University of Michigan under a wonderful labor economist, the dear Harold Levinson. And I began teaching at Boston College, a Jesuit university. And to be honest, I ain't Catholic. And I remember after 4 years of working at Boston College, I ran into Father Ed Boyle. And we became fast friends. And one day I turned to Father Ed, as I called him, and I said, you know, Father, I've now lived in Boston for 4 years, but I honestly just don't feel like I'm at home yet. And he gave me that big, wonderful laugh. He put his arm around me and he said, don't you worry, Barry. In 3 or 4 generations, you're going to be right at home. Fact is, I feel right at home, right here, tonight, and I thank all of you. In the years that I've been here, I've had the opportunity to work with many of you. Through the Harvard Trade Union Program, through the Mass Teachers Association, through the IUE and other unions. And it was working with the Labor Guild, first with Father Gavin and then Father Boyle, that I learned to love this city and to learn to love the labor movement that I had adopted after all those years in Detroit. But it also tonight brings back phenomenal memories for me, because my father, who began during World War II as a grinder in a General Motors bearing plant, making bearings that were going into tanks that went Lend-Lease to England during World War II, my father built up his union cred and over time ended up as vice president of the Auto Workers Union, and our dearest friend was Walter Reuther, one of the greatest labor leaders of all time. But you might ask, how does a Bluestone get into the labor movement? And my father, before his passing, told me this story. At the age of 22 years old, my father, it was during the war, my father couldn't get into the Army because of a childhood disease. But his dear friend, Anne Mazzaccara, a wonderful Italian lady, who would later be my godmother, talked to my dad and said, you know, Irv, there are more ways to stop the Nazis than simply to go into the Army. I'm working at this GM plant, and I think I can get you a job there. It might not be real easy because the place is completely Italian. Today, it looks a little like The Sopranos. But dear Anne Mazzaccara got my dad a job in that plant at the age of 22. 2 years later, my dad decided to run for union office for the first time. And he went to Gilberto, the president of the local, and said, you know, I really want to get more active in the union. I'd like to run for an office. And Gilberto says, you know, Irv, even though you ain't Italian, you're a pretty damn good guy. And we're going to allow you to run for alternate committeeman on the midnight shift in District 46. And so my father said, great, I love it. The day before the election, Gilberto came to my dad's workstation and said, Irv, I've got some bad news for you. You know my brother Johnny? Yeah, we know Johnny. He works over in District 21. He's our printer, and he printed up the ballots for tomorrow's election, and he spelled your name wrong. My dad said, is there any way to change that? He says, no. Takes 2 days for the ink to dry. But don't worry, Irv. They spelled your first name right. How did they butcher my second name, my dad said? Well, they spelled it Blueston. And if it hadn't been for that ballot, My dad would have been a New York policeman and not vice president of the UAW. I want to dedicate this award to my parents, because Irving and Zelda Bluestone, who were in the trade union movement from 1940, right through their entire life, educated their children, my sisters Karen and Maura and myself, to always fight for the right and to remember that solidarity forever with the union movement is the way to get that done. But indeed, exactly 20 years ago tonight, my dad and I published a book together. And I had to go back and see that, in fact, it was 20 years ago tonight that it actually came out. And it was called Negotiating the Future, a labor perspective for American business. And in it, we laid out our ideas about where the labor movement had to go in the 21st century, writing in 1992. And we said in that book that we need to get both sides together, labor and management, to take greater strides than ever before, given the global competition we faced. And that meant instead of simply treating workers better, management must be willing to share decision-making authority with them. Instead of workers' input being limited to the factory floor or the outer office, labor must be brought into the inner circle where the strategic decisions about the entire enterprise are made. Instead of trying to jettison their unions, management must be willing to welcome them as a constructive force. And we believe that. And I'm proud to say, with Nancy Peace right here, a former Boyle Award, we have begun the Massachusetts Education Partnership, working with the Mass MTA, Mass AFT, the Massachusetts Association of Superintendents, and the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. And now we already have had 300 people meet this week to build a new movement built on our union tradition to improve schools all across Massachusetts. But it turns out that this book, Negotiating the Future, would never have seen the light of day if it weren't for the two women in our lives, my mother Zelda and my wife Mary Ellen, who, when my dad and I would come to blows sometimes over a particular language, would sit us down, quiet us down, and they negotiated the future for us. Thank you very much.